It is by the clock 2 in the morning, which is an hour that tempts a sensible man to bed and an insensible man to rhetoric. I hope to be neither. The palace is in its customary hush. The corridors that only hours ago conveyed a day's traffic of diaries and documents now hold their breath. Even the old timbers seem to lean in, listening. I find myself at my desk papers in neat stacks, a fountain pen lying where I left it, a lamp making a small island of light, and I feel compelled to speak about what, for want of a better phrase, has pressed itself upon my conscience. I do not often speak like this, and I do not expect everyone to approve of a sovereign going off the well-trodden path of formal utterance. But some subjects deserve frankness, and the one before us is time, what it is, how we use it, and why our present anxieties may well be less about scarcity than about squander. The train of thought began, as such trains often do, with work of an ostensibly practical kind. I had been reviewing figures and forecasts, sustainable energy adoption rates in this country and abroad, agricultural resilience in the face of climatic swings, population projections braided with the challenges of housing and health, and the very human stories that hide just beneath the numeral. Those who know me know that I have spent the better part of my life urging patience and stewardship, seeking to honor traditions without embalming them, and to sponsor careful change where change alone would otherwise be careless. None of that has altered, but tonight the sums felt different. They seemed to tap me on the shoulder and ask a question one does not easily dodge. How much time have we really for the work that we say is urgent? Not only the work of government, but the work of living our love, our mercy, our attention to one another, and to the earth that hosts us so patiently. It is not my habit to turn that sort of inquiry into a séance. Yet, in the manner of a man who will put aside a ruler and reach for a plumb line when the wall looks suspect, I did an unusual thing. I asked out loud, because somehow the mouth's honesty steadies the mind. I asked the Lord Jesus, whom I have learned to invoke less as an idea than as a neighbor, how much time have we? What are we to focus upon? Are we, as so many fear, running out of runway? I expected, to be candid, nothing more than the comfort that sometimes follows the admission of one's worry. What came instead was clarity, not a spectacle, not a thunderclap, but the kind of clarity that arrives when a fog that you had taken for landscape quietly lifts and shows you the true line of the hill. The first thing I understood as one recognizes a face rather than solves an equation, was that my question, as posed, suffered from a common defect. We are not so much running out of time as running out of attention to time. It is a subtle distinction that changes everything. Our trouble, it seems to me, is that we have become prodigiously skilled at filling hours while becoming quite poor at inhabiting them. We have acquired a genius for speed and a corresponding clumsiness for proportion. We rush to get things done and then cannot remember why they mattered. We measure with great zeal the circumference of a task and neglect its center. To say that we are short of time is a little like saying we are short of daylight while sitting in a shuttered room. In this light, the various crises that have preoccupied our age, ecological, social, spiritual, appear not as a single grim countdown, but as a pattern of misapplied effort. Our calendars are very full, our purposes less so. We have configured our days as though efficiency were the principal virtue, and forgotten that the first question of any sensible economy is not how quickly, but to what end. If I sound severe, forgive me. I address myself no less than anyone else. It is entirely possible for a monarch to mistake motion for momentum, to confuse ceremony with service, to treat the day's engagements as ends rather than as means by which love might get some footing. A second understanding followed close upon the first. The future is not a fixed rail, along which we are propelled helplessly toward an already written terminus. It is more like a river whose course is continuously shaped by the banks we build and the channels we cut. There are undeniably consequences, slow, vast, often irreversible when we throw our rubbish into the stream. There are also transformations when we plant along its edges. To ask, therefore, how much time have we is less wise than asking what kind of people will we be with the time we have. For the character of the people sets the pace of the future. Our inventions will of course matter, our policies will matter, but in all of it, the decisive variable is the soul, the texture of our choosing. I do not say this to denigrate technology. I am deeply grateful for the patient labor of those who design and test and risk, so that others may live better than their parents lived. Yet we must be frank. An ungoverned heart can make a weapon of a spade, and a governed heart can make a sanctuary of a street. Our tools magnify what we are. That is their splendor and their danger. We attach propellers to a vessel and are astonished that it runs aground on the same rocks as before, only faster. The solution is not to curse the propeller, but to learn the chart. The third thing, which I think may surprise some who expect religion to revel in vagueness, was brutally practical. Love, so often consigned to the realm of embroidery and sentiment, revealed itself as the most efficient social technology ever entrusted to us. I use technology advisedly. Love is not a feeling alone. It is a decision to will the good of another and to organize life, our own life, accordingly. It is the best algorithm we possess for cooperation at any meaningful scale. When one examines moments of genuine human flourishing, villages that survive flood, cities that welcome strangers without collapsing, nations that navigate difference without violence, one finds not a clever hack, but love's slow arithmetic, patience instead of panic, listening instead of slogans, devotion to outcomes larger than one's own appetite. It is almost embarrassing to discover again what our grandmothers and grandfathers knew without consultancy. If this is true, then much of what we call efficiency is counterfeit. We have learned to do the wrong things more quickly. We have perfected the art of meeting targets that ought never to have been set. We congratulate ourselves on squeezing seconds from processes that, in their very conception, waste lives. I think, for instance, of a tendency to measure a nation's success chiefly by how much it produces and consumes, rather than by how well its weakest citizens are housed, taught, cared for, and given reasons to hope. A feverish market may be merely a symptom of an anxious soul. A full diary may be the sign not of significance, but of flight. A fourth insight concerned progress, and here I tread carefully because I have spent many years as a perhaps tiresome advocate of progress. Properly understood, I have argued and still argue that we must invest in the science and skills that render our presence on this earth less extractive and more gracious. But I see more sharply now that we have tried to run advanced software on an operating system too old for the task. We have asked clever machines to rescue us from unexamined motives. We have tried to patch loneliness with connectivity and mend trust with surveillance. This, as you know, does not work. It is not enough to produce new capacities. We must cultivate the wisdom by which to direct them. Wisdom, unlike information, does not scale by servers. It scales by souls, each one choosing, within the radius of a day, to prefer the common good over the immediate win. The fifth matter touched purpose, which is to say, the question that quarrels beneath our busyness. For what exactly do we optimize? It is very easy, even noble, to speak of national interest or global stability, but abstractions can lull. The question must be asked more locally. What would it look like for this child to thrive, for this river to sing again, for this family to find its footing. That is not small work. It is the only work. The large numbers, the ones we print in glossy reports, mean little if they do not mean something in the cramped kitchen where someone has to decide between heat and food. I say this as one whose office can, if he is not vigilant, become an altitude from which the texture of real lives blurs. The cure for a king or a council or a company is to keep kneeling figuratively and, when appropriate, literally, so that the measure of success remains human. A sixth insight concerned time in the more mysterious sense. We imagine it as a line upon which we are marched past, present, future, each step cancelling the last. But I suspect, and tonight I feel it as more than suspicion, that in human affairs, time is more like soil. What we do now does not merely proceed from what we did then, it also reaches back and alters it. A word of forgiveness spoken today changes the meaning of an injury suffered years ago. It does not erase it, but it re-narrates it. A decision to plant trees this winter makes a different story of summers long past, in which we took too much shade for granted. This is not mysticism, it is moral fact. We are, in that sense, entrusted with a curious power. By acting well now, we can redeem something of then. The past is not only a weight, it is also a field, and our present choices sow it. Seventh came the matter of fear. I do not despise fear. It has kept species alive. But as a policy advisor, it is appalling. Fear makes bad arithmetic, it exaggerates the likelihood of catastrophe, and underestimates the elasticity of good people when they are trusted and tasked. Faith, in this context, is not a fluffy abstraction. It is the decision to trust the process of truth and charity, to believe that small, honest steps, taken together, do indeed add up to safety and flourishing in a way that hysteria never does. I think of the countless times I have watched a village mend itself after a flood, or a family after a betrayal, not by grand gesture, but by a long, stubborn sequence of decent decisions. That is faith, not denial of the hard fact, but refusal to crown the hard fact king. The eighth lesson concerned that perennial false choice between the personal and the political, the private and the systemic. We have pitted them against each other, as though one must choose between cleaning a river and cleaning one's heart. Of course we must do both. Systems are made of persons, persons are shaped by systems. To insist upon inner change while neglecting public justice is piety turned selfish. To preach public justice while neglecting inner change is activism turned brittle. A society is a choir. You train individual voices and you write good music and you teach them to listen to one another. Remove any one piece and the performance collapses. Ninth was suffering. There is a kind we must oppose with all our might, the sort that is infected by cruelty, neglect or greed. And there is a kind we must somehow learn from the sort that attends limitation, loss, and the slow schooling by which a soul becomes gentle. Pain, unwelcome teacher that it is, often supplies the data we need to see what matters. To try to live without ever being wounded is to live, finally, without ever being moved. A person or a nation that cannot grieve cannot be wise. It will break things it does not mean to break, and worse, never understand how to fix them. The 10th and culminating clarity brought me back to my original question: how much time have we? As I said, the better question is what we shall do with the time we have. But if one insists on a timetable, and I confess there are days when a timetable would comfort me, the answer seemed to be this: we have exactly as much time as our love can turn into future. Waste love and time shrinks. Invest love and time opens. A people who choose cynicism will find that clocks accelerate. A people who choose compassion will discover capacities in themselves and in the world that previously lay asleep. The planet is groaning not because there is a stopwatch in the sky, but because there is a fracture in our priorities. Heal the latter and the former takes care of itself. Not magically, not without labor, but truly. Now, one does not wear a crown without being periodically reminded that there are many constituencies to consider. Permit me, then, to address a few briefly and with affection. To those who consider themselves strictly practical and find all this talk of love as algorithm, a little saccharine, you are, I think, more sympathetic to this than you imagine. Every successful enterprise, commercial, civic, charitable, depends upon trust, clear speech, and a willingness to restrain one's appetites for the sake of the mission. That is love in boots. You already practice it when you honor a contract, mentor an apprentice, or choose long-term stability over short-term gain. My plea is simply that you recognize this, name it, and do more of it on purpose. To those who count themselves spiritual, but are wary of anything that smells of system, the risk on your side is to confuse depth with vagueness, to prefer a haze of uplift to the hard work of building institutions that can carry kindness beyond a mood. If love is to last longer than a morning, it must consent to structure, boring, blessed structure. Calendars are not the enemy of compassion. They are often its best friend. To those of you who have followed Jesus for years and feel tired by disputations and footnotes, take heart. The core of the thing is as plain as ever: love God and love your neighbor, and it remains beautifully, maddeningly applicable. The edges of the map are worthy of study. Yes, the middle of the road is where the traffic moves. To those worn down by anxiety, depression, or the flatness that follows too many disappointments, you are not a faulty part in an impersonal machine. You are a soul of exquisite worth, and your incremental acts of courage, getting up, telling the truth to a friend, opening the window to let the morning in, contribute to the common good in ways you may never see. Time is not your enemy. You are not late to your own life. To those in positions of decision, ministers, mayors, executives, head teachers, military officers, you carry a particular burden. You have been entrusted with calendars and budgets. You can multiply or mangle the hours of many. Please, for all our sakes, weigh your measures by their effect on the most vulnerable, not by their applause in rooms where no one is poor. Remember that authority is permission to serve, not permission to be served. I say this to myself daily. What, then, do we actually do on Tuesday morning when the emails arrive and the children need breakfast and the mower refuses to start? We begin small and near. We put our diaries to the question, does this appointment advance what truly matters, or does it flatter me into feeling needed without being useful? We put our tongues to the question, does this sentence add light or merely heat? We put our purses to the question, does this purchase improve the life of a neighbor, however indirectly? Or will it conspire in wasting somebody's hour in a factory where the clock never slows? We choose, wherever possible, collaboration over competition in matters that do not need to be contests. We practice Sabbath not as an antiquated fuss, but as a humane interval in which we remember that our value is not coterminous with our output. We plant things, literal and figurative, that will not be ready in our lifetime. We honor our elders and make room for our young. We reconcile where we can and keep civility where we cannot. I cannot help, as I say these things, thinking again of monarchy, not the trappings, which are at their best theatre that teaches, and at their worst theatre that distracts, but the vocation. The job, in its oldest sense, is to keep time, to hold memory and promise together in a rhythm a nation can walk to remind people that they belong to one another across differences of class, tongue, and taste, to turn pomp into hospitality, so that the shyest guest believes the feast is for them too. If I have learnt anything, it is that a king who forgets his people's fatigue will soon be talking to himself. Time for a country, as much as for a person, is nourished by courtesy. Say after you at the doorways of our common life. And, astonishingly, the corridor does not jam. Before I put away the pen, I would like to do what has gradually become my habit when words have run as far as they can. I would like to pray not as a rule, but as a son, a father, a grandfather, a neighbor, and, for a time, your king. Lord of time and tenderness, who set the sun to mark our days and the moon to measure our seasons, teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. Save us from the waste of hurry and the vanity of noise. Give to the anxious a gentler clock, to the arrogant a shorter mirror, to the weary a chair by a window where your light can find them. Bless those who work by night so others may rest. Bless those who rise before dawn to bake bread, clean streets, stock shelves, mend bodies, and keep watch. Give to leaders the strange courage of patience and the everyday courage of truth. Let our arguments be honest and our reconciliations swift. Turn our cleverness into kindness. Make of our technologies instruments of mercy rather than engines of scorn. Teach us to plant for children we will never meet, and to speak for neighbors we do not yet know. And when our own hours run down, grant that we may be found not frantic but faithful our hands, still our hearts at peace, our work offered back to you with the simple pride of a servant who has tried. Through Jesus Christ, whose love wastes nothing and who makes even of our lateness a beginning. Amen. The lamp is guttering. Soon enough the palace will yawn and stretch and take up its bustling again. There will be hands to shake, regiments to salute, gardens to admire, plans to hear, sorrows to acknowledge, infants to bless. It will look, from the outside, like most days. But inside that day, inside any day, there is the chance to convert time from a quantity we fear into a quality we relish. If even a few of us choose to do so, choose to speak to one another as fellow heirs rather than as rivals, choose to make our schedules servants rather than masters, choose to prefer the long good over the quick applause, then the future, which is always listening, will lean toward us. Not because a clock has paused, but because love has done what it always does when it is given room. It lengthens the hours and enlarges the house. So, if you will permit a king to make a very democratic suggestion, let us keep better time together, not by squeezing more life into the day, but by letting more love into the hour. Let us debug what is petty in us and deploy what is generous. Let us stop performing exhaustion as though it were a medal, and instead learn the noble art of enough. And let us remember, when the headlines shout and the graphs grimace, that our most powerful instrument is the one we share at birth and can learn to play until our last breath. A heart trained to recognize its neighbor and to call him, her, them, us. Time, in that sense, is not running out. Time is waiting for us to come home.